What happens when law, business, and life collide? Each week on Lead Counsel, your host Tom Tona will take a deep dive into topics related to the law, the business of law, and life. There will be insightful discussions with industry insiders, experts, and thought leaders making significant contributions and meaningful differences in their fields of expertise. Tom is the founder and managing attorney at TonaLaw. He has been a practicing attorney since 1994 and the leader of TonaLaw since it opened in 2001. The goal of this podcast is to provide you with free information on law and the business of law, and to give you actionable tools related to each of these areas. Now, here's Tom.
All right, so welcome back to the Lead Counsel Podcast. This is your host, Tom Tona. I'm here with Juliet and a very special guest, a good friend of mine, my fractional CFO, I call him, Dan Feiman. Dan, what's going on, buddy?
How you doing, Tom?
Hello, I'm good. How are you, Jules?
Hi, welcome to the podcast.
So I thought it'd be great to have you on, given the people that are listening to this are in all different stages of development, very heavy in the law firm leadership and management. And so Dan comes from a background that I think is worth talking about. Dan, if you want to give us a little bit of your background, how you ended up in the consulting space that you're in and where you came from and all of that, that would be awesome.
I'll give you the short version, Tom, because as you know, my CV is 11 pages and you don't want me to read that for you.
That's fine. That's fine. I'll send people to your LinkedIn profile too at the end of this.
So I was in commercial banking earlier in my career. And after almost 20 years in commercial banking, I realized the restrictions in banking were really preventing me from helping the clients that I wanted to in the way that I thought was sustainable. So I left, my wife and I started our consulting firm, and we really focused in 4 areas for clients: strategy, leadership, finance, and succession. And I love the fact that with my own firm, I can set the rules, I can set the guidelines. And we really make sure when we work with clients that they learn from us how to sustain the improvements that we make. So our job is like a parent. It is to make ourselves expendable.
So listen, how I came to you is we have a mutual friend who, and I think it's worth sharing this story on the podcast without giving away too many particulars, who I look up to this woman so much. I mean, she's just done such amazing things. And she was what I called a sleeper, right? She'd be in a room full of men and all these guys are talking testosterone charged about how great they are. And meanwhile, she's got a multiple 8-figure net worth. She pulls me to the side one day and she's like, yeah, I'm selling my interest in the law firm. I go, what are you talking about? She goes, yeah, I've got all these commercial real estate holdings. I don't really need to work anymore. The stress is too much. And I want to spend time with my grandchild. And then she told me about her exit. And it was a very lucrative, quintessential, let's use that term, exit from her law firm. There were a lot of zeros in their exit. So I called her up and I said, look, I'm really interested in what you did from a succession planning standpoint. What was your secret sauce? And then she mentioned your name, Dan Feiman, build it backwards. She said, look, the guy was amazing. He was instrumental in my succession planning. And he really put everything together, along with a bunch of other experts, M&A experts and all of that stuff. So, of course, me never to ever sleep on an opportunity to make money either today or in the future at some point. I called you up and I was like, I heard good things. I'd love to hire you in a fractional CFO role. I kind of just gave you the title because at that point, what I really needed you for was the financial education, right? Becoming financially savvy, doing those monthly meetings like we do. And so I took advantage of that 25% that you offer, which is your financial background. And I think we've been working together like 18 months now.
That's about right.
I will say that it's been an amazing educational process. I know I'm a hard client to wrangle, probably because on a monthly basis, I stick my head in the sand about numbers.
We'll talk.
Yeah, but not in a bad way. I know what I need to know. I don't enjoy those conversations just because they don't capture where my brain is. I have that shiny object syndrome, as you call it.
Yes.
But It's been instrumental. And I would recommend anybody that's going to listen to this, hear what you do, listen to what you do, and then anything that they need in any one of those four spaces. I mean, I feel comfortable saying, look, have a conversation with Dan. He's the best. He really is great at what he does. So one of the things that actually captured me about your background was your experience at UCLA. What did you do over at UCLA?
At UCLA Extension, I have to be very careful. They are very sensitive to separate the campus on the ground from Extension, even though I taught an upper division 4-unit accredited graduate level course. I taught corporate finance. Okay. And so what I did for my clients, and typically the students in class were lawyers working on their continuing ed, CPAs working on their master's in tax, and business owners. So the median age was like 39 instead of 19. And so what I taught them was what they really needed to know about the world of business finance. And we broke it down into the three pillars, which is working capital, capital structure, and capital budgeting. And we applied it in the real world sense. In fact, that got me to writing my very first book, because when you go to university and you're taking a corporate finance course, you have to buy that 700 or 800 page book for $200 or $300, even digital these days. And the books left out so much of the real world side, because I was in commercial banking when I started. And I wanted to make sure that my students understood the difference between concept and practice. So that led me to write the first of my 4 books. And as I think you well know, I'm currently trying to finish. In fact, I have a meeting Tuesday with my publisher, my 4th book, and this is the succession planning model. And it's something that I've used with clients who show up regularly to our scheduled meetings to prepare them as he looks around. But truly, the idea is to have a template, a roadmap to prepare for the future of your organization. Whether you decide to exit or not is a separate question. The succession planning is what is truly important. So in a roundabout way of answering your question, I started teaching in UCLA back in 1990, and I taught there in the extension program for 25 years. And what got me to stop teaching is I was too busy with clients to work on campus anymore. So I started to try to teach virtually. In those days, we're going back a lot of years, the online platforms weren't anything like what we're sitting on today.
Right.
They were pre-DOS based. Literally, it was horrid.
Okay.
And then tie COVID into that. So you fast forward to 2020, I got off a plane, an international trip where I was teaching, and it had been rerouted 5 times in the air before coming home, because I couldn't land where we were supposed to because they were closing airports the middle of March of 20. I land, we have COVID, things are going nuts. Something told me it wasn't going to be short term. I rewrote some of my best training programs from face-to-face presentation style to virtual, convinced a couple of my sponsors to market it that way, and that converted a significant part of the training side of my practice, the teaching side, to virtual. And so Zoom, and we all know what happened with that, et cetera. Point is, what business had been trying to do for 20 or 25 years, which is to make virtual training, virtual consulting a reality, because of COVID, became a reality.
Became a necessity, right? If you wanted to continue to do it, you had to do it that way. Everything else was against the law, especially in my state and your state, 2 Democrat states.
Right.
So interesting, right? So one, let's talk about your books. Give me the title for the first 3. What we'll do is we'll put the books in links to Amazon, right. But give me, I know the Build It Backwards series. Are all 3 books part of this series?
Yes.
Okay, so it's called Build It Backwards. What's book 1?
Book 1 was on finance. That one I wrote so long ago, it's actually out of print. And should I get an extra block of time in my life, I really do want to rewrite that. The second one was Improving Productivity by Fair Means or Foul. And yes, there is a legal disclaimer in there, Tom, between the fair means of increasing productivity and, shall we say, some of the creative ones We put all of those in there, tongue in cheek. I want to put this disclaimer out there now.
Okay.
They're not intended to be suggestions to actually implement.
Okay.
Be careful there. But our third and most successful book to date was The Book on Business from A to Z, the 260 most important answers you need to know. And I know that's a very long title, but if you just put in the book from A to Z, it's one of the first that come up. And like most business books, you really don't make any money on the book per se. This is not like writing a novel or Harry Potter. The purpose really of the books is to share what's important in different areas. And you've seen the book, you've got a copy of the book. But it's really to give clients an opportunity to see, oh, maybe you know something enough to put it down on paper and be held accountable to it. And it's really led to significant engagements that we've had over the years. That's really why you write a business book,
right?
Not for the money.
Not to make money on it. Right. Tell me the name of your fourth book and what you think. I don't know if you have it done yet, but conceptually, what do you want the focus of the fourth book to be before we even get into, everything else?
Well, the fourth book is the book on succession planning. And it's really, to be clear, succession planning done properly is a leadership development program. It's how you identify, assess, and develop the next generation of leaders within your organization.
Oh, I like that.
And so if you go back to an excellent book called Built to Sell, the author talked about the fact that you need to make yourself effectively dispensable. When you, as the CEO of an organization, are fully dispensable, it can run without you. And the point there is, with succession planning, you, again, identify, assess, and develop key people into roles. And sometimes the development is 6 months, sometimes the development might be 5 years, without promising anybody anything until they perform and we have opportunities. It's how you plan the long-term growth of the firm. If that develops and evolves into a transition, as it does with many people, and that transition evolves into exit, excellent. And so I collaborate with people in the exit planning industry. In fact, I sit on the board of the Orange County chapter of the Exit Planning Institute. And so I collaborate with a number of people who specialize in different steps in the exit planning process, because we don't do that. But we bring a client right up to the precipice.
Where they're ready.
That. Exactly right.
Well, it's funny. That was how our mutual friend described you, which was, she said, when I made the decision, Dan got me ready to sell. Dan got my everything that it's supposed to look like when you're buying a business, you helped put into place. And I know that it was a great result. I know she was very happy. I would be happy too with that result. And again, I think that's why I have so much respect for her, because she really is a sleeper. Like, in a room full of talk, she's doing all this stuff on the quiet, her and her ex-partner or prior partner. And I mean, just talk about some smart moves, bringing you on where most people wouldn't think to do that, right? I thought it was brilliant. What's the fourth book going to be called? Do you have a name for it?
We haven't officially titled it yet, but what I'm looking at, of course, is The Book On, because each of my books in the Build It Backwards series are The Book On Succession Planning, the last leadership development book you'll need.
I like it. Well, I'm definitely going to want to read a copy of that, because I know I haven't been showing up for my calls. Well, not that I haven't been showing up. We haven't been able to pin it down yet to a time that works, but I'm going to start, because I know that at 55, I owe it to the people that are part of my team, to my family, and to myself to properly make myself dispensable, right? What was the word you used? Dispensable or disposable?
Dispensable. Cannabis, Tom, should be disposable.
Okay.
It's definitely dispensable. And the reason it is so important from my standpoint, here's my passion in this, is I had a prospective client a few years ago who was the heart and soul, the marketing center, the strategic mind, the founder of a great national organization with international clients. And one Monday morning, he didn't wake up. And The chairman of his board called me and said, "What the heck do we do?" And I tried to calm them down. There was no succession plan. There was no strategic plan. There was no other leader being groomed for anything, not just his role.
Right.
And in a panic, in spite of what I tried to tell them we could do, they liquidated the company almost overnight. They put 400 families out. And that really hurt me because they didn't need to do that. Even without a plan, we could have run the company. I had a plan put together to make sure the company continued. We could have found a replacement for key roles, etc.
And then
panicked.
How big was that company from a revenue standpoint, just so people can get an idea of how important this is at every level?
They at the time were about $60 million in revenue.
Oh my God.
It was so unnecessary. It really broke my heart because not only the impact on the organization itself, but all of the families that were negatively impacted that didn't need to be. So I try to teach my clients, and you've heard this from me before, live by the 5 Ps. Proper planning prevents poor performance.
Yep. I've heard that a million times.
It's not only the 5 Ps, Tom, but it's implementing the 5 Ps, not just the planning side.
All right, you sold me. I'm going to set up a meeting with you. I got to get it done. I think there's a natural aversion to it because you're acknowledging something that no one wants to acknowledge, which is there's going to be an end in sight, whether you want it or not. You're also acknowledging that you should go out at some point, right? We've talked about that. How do you know when to go out? I think where a lot of people, especially in the legal field, fail to execute properly is knowing when to go out. Go out when you're on top. Your skills are not as sharp as they used to be. And it's hard, man. It's ego and it's kind of death, right? It's almost kind of accepting a death while you're still alive. It's hard, man. It's psychological.
I would go out on a limb and say many business owners have that aspect where they don't want to lose control or let go of the control of their business because you guys spend so many years building it up. So I can imagine it's difficult to
It is
step away.
really difficult. All right, so let's talk about succession planning and business development because that is your passion, right? When you have an owner such as myself, where you know there's some kind of block there, what do you recommend for people to wrap their heads around it?
I ask a question, which is, do you plan to die under your desk?
Oh, I hate that question.
And why do you hate it, Tom?
He would probably have answered yes about like 5 years ago.
No. And I'll tell you why. So I've always asked myself, am I a die at the desk type of guy? And I can't think of a more horrific way to die, which is why I've reached the level that I'm at now in terms of completely out of operations, right? I've completely removed myself probably about, it's been a long time since I've touched files, but let's say 5 years operationally, I've not touched a file. And then I started to focus on the stuff we focus on. But the idea, the sadness of that imagery of just slumped over my desk and having interviewed somebody probably in the last 2-3 years, I spoke to a guy who was an attorney and his resume popped up, but he wasn't even looking for a job. But I called him and I said, so what's your story? He was a reference for somebody, actually. This guy was a reference. I said, what's your story? And he said, well, I had several heart attacks at my desk. I was legally dead, and now I'm out on disability. And that happened in his 40s. So I was like, oof, that's I want to be anything but that. So now you're going to make me get off my ass and start showing up for these succession planning meetings. So clearly, succession planning requires expertise. You got me over the hump of wanting to do this. Where do you start with people? Give them as much value as you feel comfortable disclosing. Like, I doubt that anybody could do this on their own. So take us through what your process looks like.
Well, to your point, yes, you can do it on your own, but I also have a cartoon. Actually, it's not a cartoon, it's a photograph of a gentleman in scrubs who is attempting to take out his own appendix. So,
send me that cartoon, please.
Yes, you can do it on your own, but I do not recommend it. Normally, most of us don't fly internationally ourselves, we hire a professional pilot, et cetera, et cetera. I don't manage my own money. I've got a great firm that I work with that handles our money. In fact, I've introduced them to you.
Yep.
So I believe that you do what you do best and hire the rest. So I sit down with a client and we do an assessment. Where are you? Where's your firm? We'll typically do a strategic assessment of an organization, figure out what works really well, what the few core competencies are, et cetera. And then same thing with the individual, and it's typically the CEO, but sometimes it's the COO, CIO, et cetera. And we do an assessment of them personally, just as we do with the organization. Where are you? How's your health? How long do you want to run the firm? We ask a variety of questions. For those who want to be in charge, and most people who are running a firm want to be in charge, it gives them an opportunity to recognize that the future of the firm is in their hands. And that's what you want. You get to design exactly where you want the firm to go. And you get to design exactly where you want to go and when. Succession planning does not have to at all be exit planning. If you want to develop a great firm that either grows or dominates a niche or, that's all part of succession planning. But it is, again, what are the most critical positions? We've got an assessment tool within our roadmap to assess the most critical positions in the firm. And within that, what is the likelihood of them being vacated deliberately or accidentally? How critical is the position? How critical is the knowledge for the individual, et cetera? It's a 6-step process. All of this ties into creating this roadmap, and we've broken our process down, and the book follows the process exactly. There are 5 steps in the process, and in each of the steps, there are 6 phases, and there's a worksheet or an assessment on each of the 6. So it's a 30-step process. Now, I know that's going to scare you.
You did. You're already terrified. I hit a number 30. I'm like, that's so much work.
Yes. However, A, I'm going to teach you what you need to know. B, I'm going to hold your hand through it. C, I'm going to push you from phase 1 to phase 2. And as you pick up momentum, as you recognize the benefit to you, as you really dig deep into what's exceptionally good about your firm, what needs to be improved, how good some people are that you have in some areas, and where you want them in others. So another tool within our process is a gap analysis. For a position, what's the ideal? We've got a tool where you lay out the ideal candidate for any role in the firm. And that's both based on education, experience, personal attributes, etc. So it's pretty deep. So here's the ideal candidate. Here is person A, B, and C. And it could be more than one person. So here's the ideal. Here's where the person is against that. The difference is the gap or the things that you want to help them improve on. That ties into a development plan, which is a formal written plan, short, medium, and long term, where you and your protege in any of the positions commit to, this is where I am. This is where we're going to work on bringing you. So everybody can see effectively a career roadmap without commitments. Here's where we're taking you. We're investing in you, assuming someone wants to grow within the firm. And then as opportunities to fill roles come up, you've got your bench strength. It's so common in firms, law firms, manufacturing firms, and everything in between, to have positions open up, and we haphazardly take the most senior person or the person who hasn't pissed off anybody,
Right.
and move them into a slot that they may or may not be really qualified for and may or may not want.
Right. Or have the capacity for mental, emotional, or whatever else.
You know the classic example we've all heard of. You need a new sales manager. So you take your top salesperson, put them into a role they're not prepared for, don't want, and they're going to make less money.
Right.
How demotivating.
Right.
Rather than preparing one or more people to take over a management role, and teaching management is a skill set. Learning to be a manager is not for everyone. So having the right people in the right seats makes a critical difference. So that goes back to the 5 Ps. So each of the phases in our 5 steps is not overwhelming. It's logical. It's taking the time to sit down and go through the steps. And as you look at your firm, as you look at your people, you're going to have some aha moments.
I just had one while you were talking.
And just wait till we actually start working on this on a formal basis. It's actually a lot of fun because you've got eye-opening moments, you got aha moments, and you got oh my goodness moments.
So let me ask you a question. I have a leadership team designated with mixed levels of higher level management experience, right? They would be, I think we've talked about more like middle managers with the exception of Janira, who's got all this extensive training.
Yes.
For the people that are listening to this, law firms that might be 10 years on the journey behind us, can you offer management training to the 20-somethings on my leadership team that are actually really skilled, very insightful? Juliet happens to be on the leadership team, right? We were joking about it yesterday. Her and a woman named Alicia, who's 27, she runs HR, but really skilled, 5 solid years of experience. And I think that both her and Alicia would really benefit from management training. Do you teach that? Is that what you do? Could I utilize you in that role to train my people that need some higher level management training?
Yes.
Awesome.
And to give you a little bit more.
Well, so Jules, that's where I think we talk to Janira and at the next leadership team meeting on Tuesday and see who thinks they need what. It might be the entire team. It might be the entire team that just says, look, we're going to sit in on the training. What I already know, okay, it's redundant. What I don't know, maybe I learned better.
Yeah.
But to the point, really to answer your question a little more fully than just yes, is we've got a 12-module leadership and management training program.
Okay.
The idea is you either can sign people up for the entire 12 modules because communication, delegation, accountability.
Oh, you got to send me this. You got to send me this somewhere, dude.
Just listening to this first 3, I'm like, oh.
Is this on your website, the 12 modules?
No, we just refer to the leadership training there in total. We've done this for 3 different firms recently. Mm-hmm. And each, when we laid out the 12 modules, said, okay, we'll take the package.
Wait, so what are the full 12 modules? Because I think we cut you off after 3.
Sorry.
Well, Tom does that.
I'm sorry.
The conversation.
Yep.
It's just pure excitement.
That is what it is.
It's his passion. But we start with communication, and the reason we always start with communication is because it's the foundation of everything we do. We all talk, some of us actually listen, but we all talk on a day-to-day basis. And what percentage of people actually have formal training in effective speaking? Very few. How many have been trained to actively listen? Very few. But it's the foundation of so much of what we do. And here's just a little tidbit. What percentage of our communication is the words we speak?
I know it's a lot less than the nonverbal communication.
Yes, but Tom, if you were to quantify it,
25%.
Go ahead.
I'm gonna guess lower, 10%.
7% of our communication is the words we speak. That means, Tom, you mentioned it, the nonverbal, the eye contact, the body language, the facial expressions, the pace, the tone, etc. So we go through all of this because until we're effective communicators, it's going to be difficult to do anything else in a leadership role. So teaching people effective speaking and active listening are the first two steps. And then depending on what the team needs and the level of interest, team building is critical. And I know, Tom, you're really big on this over at TonaLaw. The accountability, motivation, etc. To be honest, I can't remember all 12 off the top of my head, but I will send you the list Monday when we come back from vacation.
Okay.
And we can schedule it.
Yep. And send me the pricing information, all of that. I'm sure you have all
The
of that.
communication stuff sounds a lot like this book Tom and I read called STFU. I can't remember who wrote it, but
I'll say it.
Go ahead.
So
it was a great book.
Yeah.
Jules and I sat across from each other because we're both, so she's a screaming high I on the disc. We talk about the disc all the time. And I have a very high I as well, but my D, which is the aggressive part of me, like kind of tamps that down a lot, unless I'm excited about something, right? So we sit across from each other and we're like, I think I'm a talkaholic. Like, I think we have issues in terms of not listening. I've actually researched, where can I learn how to improve my active listening skills? So you and I got a lot of talking to do.
We both can't shut up. That's why we made this podcast.
Yeah. Well, look, the real reason we made it is to introduce people like you to other people, right? Because I think there's tremendous value in getting the word out about somebody like you who people don't even know, like, that there are resources like you. Shit, I know you for 18 months or 2 years now, and I didn't know that what I'm looking for, I'm researching on Google, how do I become a better active listener? And you're teaching that, right? So yeah, I definitely want you to send me that. I'm very interested in it in terms of my leadership team and what we can do with that. So yeah, I'd be very interested. How long does a program like the management training program take for the 12 modules?
It depends on your schedule. You effectively meaning the client, because generally the modules are full day modules if we do it properly. So you're looking at 12 full days.
Okay.
With most firms, what we end up doing is every other week is the most common way for us to work together that way, because we lay the background, we go through, with most of these, we include an assessment. It's a self-assessment. So on motivation, we've got a series of questions to help you recognize how actively or passively you motivate. Same thing with the team building, same thing with communication, etc. So it's laying the groundwork, giving some background, going through examples, and then it's interactive tools. It's game playing. And I use that term very carefully. Playing business games, as you well know, because you've been through EOS, etc.
Yep.
Very effective in helping us internalize, understand, and appreciate the benefit of tools. So we go through different exercises. We go through, whether you call them exercises or activities or games, it's utilizing the tools that we're learning in real time to then take some coaching, some criticism, some tips from your peers on how to improve.
I am very interested. Man, this is why I love doing this, though. Like, if I didn't carve out 2 hours to talk to you today, I would have never known this. And this is exactly the stuff, like, I've been looking for certain things that it's hard to find in the market, right? Like how you become an active listener. There's a ton of stuff that pops up, but it's not all, like, I didn't find anything a year and a half ago when I looked for this. So yeah, I think it's awesome. And I'm very interested in it. So let's talk about the succession planning stuff that you offer to all kinds of businesses. And let's use a real world example. Our mutual friend that you did the planning for. How long did that process take? It didn't seem like it was a very long process, to be honest with you.
Well, it was longer than it normally would have been because we integrated her financial acumen, because she was first introduced to me by a friendly competitor of hers.
Okay.
Who I've been working with for the last 3 years. He said, so-and-so, you have to meet Daniel. So I interviewed her, and her first concern was she shared she had some interest in selling her part of the firm, but she couldn't understand her numbers. So the first thing we did was I taught her how to read her P&L. And we looked at it and I asked a few questions and she said, oh my. So I got her a new CPA to help really improve their reporting. Everything was fine. It just was reported poorly. So by helping her get a new CPA, by understanding her numbers, that then allowed her to be more comfortable that she could sell the firm. She had identified a potential candidate who was someone who she had known for a number of years. I talked to him. Turned out when he bought in, he and I have continued to work together with that firm, and we're still working together now, just as you and I have kind of expanded our original process.
Right.
And that's generally how it works. So it was about a 6-month process with her, but normally we can go through the succession planning model as quickly as someone is willing to dedicate time. I wouldn't expect you today to commit the next 2 weeks full-time, 80 hours, to go through the process. Because frankly, neither one of us would survive that intensity. Let's be honest. But with most of my clients, Tom, it's the same thing. You got a business to run. So we're typically looking at anywhere from a month to 3 months to go through the roadmap, the process, at a pace that allows you to be optimally productive, both running your firm and going through the process. But one quick caveat, and I know Jules wants to jump in. No documented plan is going to remain unchanged because the world evolves. It's the process we go through that is the value, not the final document.
Right, because then it's adaptable, right? Once you learn what goes into it, if there's a change in circumstances, you can rewrite that portion of the plan, right? It's the same as every other planning. So I think this was really good to do because it demystifies it a lot. And also, I always think, so Jules, well, you were going to ask a question. Ask the question you were going to ask first.
Well, I was going to ask, how soon do you recommend a business owner to start working on or even thinking about their succession plan?
In a perfect world, Jules.
In a perfect world, yes.
The day they start the business.
Funny you mention that. If you buy a house and plan to live there until you die, whether you maintain it or not is a question that's a personal issue. If you buy a house, you maintain it optimally so that if someone knocks on the door and offers you stupid money for your house, it's showcase ready. Mm-hmm. That's the parallel I make. Oh. Every firm should be optimizing itself every day because you never know. And if we optimize it, then that's all the stakeholders. That's every member of the firm from the leadership to the newest addition. All of our external stakeholders get the greatest benefit when we're doing our best every day. And so a succession plan, which can be a 25-year plan, just as a strategic plan can, is a tool for us when we are ready to start to plan for the future of the firm, not the demise of the firm. If we look at it properly, a succession plan, if we rebrand it, as a couple of my clients has, as a leadership development plan, should be ongoing. It should be part of what we do every year, just as updating our strategic plan should be. Because you don't have to be perfect, and none of us will be, but you want to be this much better than everybody else.
You know, it's funny, as you're talking, I think about, and again, I have a fair amount of connections in the legal space, right? The amount of attorneys that I've heard griping about their business and then say, man, I wish I could get involved in startups, because you always hear the glamour stories of the cash outs, right? And meanwhile, they're not taking care of the one asset that they have the most value and control over, which is their law firm. Most law firms, they don't look at them like a business, right? And I think that's probably the bigger issue. They don't look at them that way. They don't run them that way. And all I keep thinking in my head is, I used to go to Florida a lot when I was single. I used to go to Palm Beach. And when I was drinking back in the day, I'd sit at the bar in the hot sun, having margaritas, listening to Jimmy Buffett, who's now dead, rest in peace. And you always got to talk to the guy with the fancy watch who got the cash out, right? And I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to be the old guy who's like, yeah, I got that big cash out. I built it. I sold it. I cashed it out, right? But I can't do that if I don't plan for it. And then what ends up happening, Jules, the die at your desk model is a liquidation sale, meaning a fire sale, meaning if you're lucky, what it was 2 days before you died, you're getting 25 cents on the dollar because you died, right? The one thing I have done that I hope anybody's listening to this is at that stage too, is I killed the hero a long time ago. I don't market Tom Tona, I market TonaLaw. I built systems that don't involve me, right? For 99% of what I got going on right now. So in that extent, I'm not doing nothing, but I think it's time to dig my head out of the sand so I could be that old guy at the bar, even though I'm only drinking club soda now. I don't drink, but I definitely see so much value in what you're talking about. And I hope that anybody that's listening to this thinks, I got to reach out to Dan for any one of the 4 specialties he has, but at least to talk about succession planning, right? Any caveats to working with you? Do you have any people that you won't work with?
Yes. I don't think I can say it on a podcast. We have a no difficult person policy.
Wow. And you work with Tom?
Yeah, we have a no.
Wait a minute. What?
I would think he's pretty difficult.
Jules, we do have a no asshole rule. Anybody who is going to be too difficult to work with, anyone who's not going to do their homework, but don't get me excited about making a sustainable difference in your firm and get started and then not do the work. Because all I can do is share my experience, share anecdotes of clients we've worked with, and give you the tools and the direction to really do the best in your firm. But if you're not going to be willing to put in the work that it takes for you to do what you need, I'm not interested in working with you. Now, the good news is I've only had to fire maybe 5 clients in the last 27 years, and 2 of them were just impossible to work with. I was wrong to take them on, so I don't do that anymore.
Okay.
The other 3 all said the right thing, but when it came to them doing the work, they kept manana, and we weren't making progress because they weren't doing the work for themselves. And in each of those 3 cases, I said, why do you keep paying me when you're not doing what you need to do? I'm not the solution to your future. You are. And in each of the 3 cases, we reached the point where they simply said they were too busy and couldn't do the work. And I said, well, then we should stop working together, because I'm firmly of the belief that we should add more value to you in your organization over our time working together than we charge you. So we become an investment in your future rather than a cost of doing business.
Yeah, listen, it sells itself, right? I think, so you have these 4 areas of specialty: strategy, leadership, finance, succession. I've been working with you in a financial capacity. You kind of got my head spinning right now. So I don't know where to start. Where do I start with Dan? Is it leadership? Is it succession planning? Because if you say both, you're going to make my head explode. So
I wouldn't want to do both, Tom, because we need to focus on one thing at a time.
Okay.
So offline, we'll have a conversation, and I'm going to ask you some questions to help you determine which is truly your priority today.
Fair enough.
Is it leadership? Is it succession? We've already talked about the fact that you're considering buying a building versus leasing a building for your expansion.
Right.
Well, I've run some numbers for you, and I'm going to be able to show you very quickly for you. Here's option A. Here's option B. Here's option C. As I've analyzed it, you're going to make the decision, and then that will trigger the next step. So we do the same thing.
Well, it's funny. I've had to change the circumstances. I know our next call, we got to get into some real meat and potatoes. I've had a significant opportunity come up that I have to figure out. And it's interesting. It's very, very interesting. But I think that you've got me reinvigorated to really look at certain areas. Like I was literally on my last leadership meeting and I said, there are a new breed of entrepreneur out there like myself. This guy, Gary V, you know who Gary V is, right? Gary Vaynerchuk. He says, yeah, you would love to always hire the perfect manager. But what's wrong with hiring a 25, 27-year-old if they're ready for it and training them, right? Except I don't know how to train managers, man. And you know me, I'm not a hand-holding type of guy. So I know that I have the right people. I know that I made the right decisions. So yeah, I got to look at that with you, let you ask your questions and start thinking about, okay, what's the next step with you, Dan? Because the financial stuff is great. And you've been so valuable in that regard, by the way, helping me analyze different financing instruments, like really stepping into the financial role and filling in the gaps that accountants just don't do, right? They're just bean counters. No offense to my bean counter, but they just count the beans. They don't plan for allocation, execution, all of that stuff. So that's where I've used you strategically. But I think, yeah, I want to continue to look at, okay, what's next? So for you, did you have any questions for me?
The one question I had for you, which will take us completely out of this vein, was what has been the biggest benefit to you of this podcast series?
So originally we started it because Juliet would sit in my office. I mean, she's marketing, right? So of all the things that I'm reluctant to ever abdicate myself doing is marketing because I love it. Like I love marketing. I love the challenge of it. Although I did have an epiphany recently that my marketing's fine. I need to get better on making sure my operations are there to support all the stuff that we do. And we did hire a ops person who's fantastic at intakes, and my intake numbers are through the roof now. So, but the main benefit is because it's truly value-based. I'm talking to people that I love talking to, that I am fascinated by. And I'm able to share it with people that would not have access to people like you or like some of my other guests that, you know, rang a bell for $100 million on a verdict and how he did it. And Juliet is 24 years old. When would she have exposure to those types of people? Now everybody has exposure to them for an hour. And then they could say, okay, maybe I don't have the funds to afford a Dan, but I'm going to put Dan on my list. And when I can afford a Dan, I'm going to hire Dan. Basically, the biggest benefit for me is I'm looking to give people access to what I feel very blessed to have, which is a 7, 8, 9-figure favorites list on my iPhone. I scroll through that iPhone. I go, oh my God, look how blessed I am. And then a lot of people don't have that, right? But even up the chain, I can provide figure to a $10 million plus player. I'm providing value by making an introduction to you because I just happen to be lucky enough to meet you through another 8-figure player who you increased her net worth by 30%. She already had a ton of money to begin with, right? Multiple 8 figures in net worth, and you increased it by 30%. So I'm blessed to know you. And so by sharing that with people, what ends up happening is people now connect with me across the country. I go to these masterminds. They're like, dude, your podcast is fire. People are like saying, you know, thank you so much for putting that out there. But I'm also building those connections so that they're thinking of me top of mind in New York in my space. So that's really what I get out of it, is just being able to provide for other people. And then they think of me if they need me. That's really it, you know?
Yeah.
So,
and then
go ahead, Jules.
For someone like myself, I used to sit in on a ton of conversations Tom would have with many different colleagues and people that he knows. And then just based on conversations him and I would have ourselves, I would always say, why don't we just record this and put this out there? Because so many other people have the same questions I have, or want to have the same discussions that we're having right now. We should just put it out there for everybody. And so that's honestly been the best part, is just being able to broadcast these conversations to anybody who's interested or willing to learn from them. And I mean, for me, it's a huge learning opportunity every time I'm on the podcast. So
yeah, I mean, look, one thing I'm trying to do is I think back to mentors I had. and the old law firm leaders, right? They weren't really leaders. They were bosses, very stodgy. And the 24-year-old, 30-year-old, the 40-year-old attorneys, they didn't get to sit at the table at lunch with the 7, 8, 9-figure players. I'm in those rooms all the time, and I get to open those rooms up to people where people can then reach out to these people on social media and be like, hey, Dan, I heard what you did for Tom. I'm not where Tom's at, but I'd love your help. Or I'm double the size of Tom, but I picked the wrong fractional CFO, and I'd love to talk to you, right? So by doing that, it's just giving back to the profession in a space where that's not a concern for most people. And that really bothers me because there's a whole host of people that are so lost at what we do, right? So,
and I'm glad you say that. And that's one of the reasons we're so simpatico. I tell my clients, I am your business concierge. If you need something beyond what I do, and I'm constantly looking when I'm working with clients through the projects, what do they need beyond what I do? That's why I have the Rolodex. There's an old-fashioned term for you.
Yeah.
I do. Excuse me, the database. I do, because I've had the pleasure, as I mentioned earlier, I've worked in 30 different countries. I've maintained relationships with colleagues all over the world, all over the U.S., all over our local region. And when a client needs somebody well beyond what we do, I've got the ability, I've got the pleasure of being able to make that introduction. And I track those. My wife says I have a spreadsheet for everything, but I track all of the introductions that I make, and then I follow up to see how they worked out. For example, last year, I made 93 direct introductions between clients and service providers that they needed. And it's thrilling to be able to make that difference. And people say, well, how do you know somebody? I said, look, I know a guy what knows a guy. My wife's from Queens. She taught me how to speak that way.
Right.
But it's part of the relationship that I developed both during my banking career, even before that, when I worked back in a printing plant in undergraduate school. Developing relationships that last is so critical. Because when I see a need, I have the need personally to fill that need. So a client needs a CPA, they need a wealth advisor, they need a roofer. I'm still making referrals to a guy that fixed my roof after the 94 earthquake in California because he did such a fabulous job. So it's, 34 years later, I'm still giving him referrals.
Right.
Because I want to help my client. And this guy does what they need and does such a good job. Why not put them together?
And what that does is that produces karma for you, right? Like it's good to give back in the world without asking for anything in return. And that's kind of what I'm doing with the podcast, to answer your question in a circular way. But, just doing good for other people. And it is helpful hearing from people like you that there are resources out there. And I would tell anybody that's listening to, depending on where you're at, pick up the phone, talk to Dan. The first conversation is not going to cost you anything. Yes, there's a fee to Dan's services. Well worth the investment. Every single time there's going to be a return on in that investment. If you think about it in terms of what we just survived, which was COVID. I didn't know you at that point. I don't think I had talked to you in 2020. I think I just talked to our mutual friend and said, how'd you do what you did? And then she made the introduction right after COVID. But when COVID hit, who's the first person I called? My business coach at the time, which was Patrick Wilson. Patrick is a coach and a consultant. I was on the phone with him every other day. And let me tell you something. God forbid there was another COVID. You're going to be the next guy. You're going to be that guy that I'm on the phone with every other day, right? So there is a benefit. People are like, there's so many gurus out there and they all charge a fortune. There are too many people calling themselves coaches and consultants. The other reason that I wanted to put this out is to really show anybody that's listening who the real deal is, right? And I'm going to end it on this. Dan, you are the real deal. Like, you have been a great addition to our team. I highly recommend you to everybody. And let's ask you one last question. What in your life has been your biggest needle mover in your professional life?
In my professional life, the biggest needle mover was when I was really struggling with justifying still being a banker because of my internal conflicts with restrictions of policies, etc. My wife and I were waiting for a table at a restaurant, and there was a very long wait, so I think we might have accidentally gotten into our second pitcher of margaritas. And she said, "You work too hard for people who don't appreciate you and the contribution you want to make. Why don't you start your own firm?" And I never would have done that on my own, taken that entrepreneurial risk. One of the things that has come out of that is I've recognized in the last 27 years that it's no more safe working in a firm. It's no safer than going out on your own. The wonderful thing is friends of ours told us, I think when we hit our 10-year anniversary, they took us to dinner and they toasted us and said, "Isn't it great having your own firm? You get to pick which 12 hours a day you work." And that was very, very true. If you're willing to be disciplined, if you're willing to put in the work, it gives you the opportunity to make the difference you want, which is why we're blessed that we've been able to make a difference with our clients. So that particular dinner where my wife basically said, "I believe in you. You can do better on your own than working for these firms." And we took the leap. And it took a few years before my advisory board got me to change the name of the firm to Build It Backwards, which is so perfect because they said that's the way you work from a client's ideal outcome backwards to today. The old name was horrid. I won't even share it with you.
Come on. I got to know now. I got to know.
Diversified Solutions and Finance.
Okay. Yeah, you're better off Build It Backwards.
No kidding, Jules. It was horrible. And there are people today that don't even know me by name. Like one of the bike shops I go to, I'm a cyclist, going to get my bike repaired. "Oh, Mr. Build It Backwards." The name resonates with everyone, and it is how we work. Literally, what is your ideal outcome? Let's reverse engineer.
I was just going to say that. You're reverse engineering the success point you want. I love that. I love that.
And so that was the biggest needle mover in my career.
Awesome. Dan, thank you. You are a tremendous friend, resource, asset to my firm. A lot of what we're doing right now, you in conjunction with the other training that I'm going through with EOS and with everything else, has really, really just made us stronger, financially more savvy and stronger on the financial side. And I'm looking forward to expanding the other stuff now that we've been talking about in this last episode. So thank you again for coming on. Tell people how to get in touch with you. What's the best way? Is it LinkedIn? Is it a website? How do you want people to get in touch with you?
Certainly LinkedIn or builditbackwards.com. Of course, they can go to our website. And Daniel Feiman at Build It Backwards is a direct email to me. Reach out. As you said, Tom, we don't charge anybody for a phone call. We'll have a conversation. If it's a fit, if what they want to do with their firm is within our core competency, we can talk about an engagement. If what a client needs, and we get these calls all the time, is not within our core competency, I'm happy to make the appropriate introduction.
Awesome. Dan, thank you. And for anybody that's listening to this, take Dan up on that. Call him, reach out with any kind of questions if you want to see what your future could look like with the right person guiding you along. Dan, thank you so much. If you're tuning into this, you can find this podcast wherever podcasts are distributed, Apple, Google, etc. Leave us a 5-star review and share it with anybody you think that would find value in hearing Dan and the stuff that Dan has to offer to corporations of all sizes. Dan, thank you, my friend.
Thank you so much.
Anytime, Jules. Anytime, Tom.